Hey, welcome to the Coffee Break Show. I'm Vickie Helm. Today I have Christian De La Huerta with you, and we're going to blow your mind. And we'll do that as soon as we get back. See you in a minute. You're on the Success Secrets for Business, Family, and Life channel. This is the Coffee Break Show. Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I wish me and my partner didn't have so much power struggle. Man, I wish I could stick up for myself a little bit better. Man, I wish I didn't. Every time my boss asks me, I'm always staying late or doing something or giving our power away. Well, today we're going to be talking about how to take all of you back, not just your power, but all of you back. Today we have with us Christian De La Huerta. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. You're thinking, I'm not sure I know about him. Well, that's okay. I'm going to tell you about him because he is an award-winning author. He's an acclaimed speaker, and he speaks everywhere: universities, conference, multinational corporation, spiritual communities, but most important, TedX stages. And his new book, Awakening the Soul of Power, has a message about authentic self-expression and personal empowerment. So if you want to transform your relationship to power so that you can stop selling out on your personal power and free yourself from your own self-sabotaging behaviors, this is the show for you. And I want to welcome you to the show today, Christian. Thank you for being here.
Vickie, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. I was feeling, God, I want to know that guy. Who is that guy? Thank you.
Today we're going to unpack that guy for everyone so that we can actually have some fun and see. Now, listen, if you're here watching the show, wherever you're watching it from, if you're watching it on YouTube, whatever, put your name down below and become part of the conversation. My better half is already weighed in. She is welcome to the Coffee Break Show, Christian. Thank you very much for that. And
Hey,
if you're driving or doing whatever and you're listening live, just remember today we're going to have absolutely everything in the show notes. You can relax. You're going to be able to get and read a copy of this book right here. Now, I got to tell you, I have been enjoying this book so much. It's dog-eared, it's highlighted, and we're going to first off, I just want to talk about how you even got, I mean, I know how you got on the path because I read the but I want you to talk about it here. How did you get to the point where you understood that power is often given away and that we're sabotaging ourselves because we're afraid of our own power? And who would have thought that we were afraid of our own power?
Well, it's been such a long journey for me. I'm such an unlikely person to be speaking about empowerment and what it means to live a heroic life. My adolescence, Vickie, was one long depression with suicidal fantasies, and so I know what I'm talking about because I know what it feels like to be disempowered, and my journey from self-doubt to self-confidence. If that can happen in me, I know it can happen in anybody. And so that's why I wrote this book, is because it's to guide people through that journey to personal empowerment, which is so important.
Yeah, because a lot of people think personal empowerment is kind of something that's, what's the word I want to use? Bullying almost. Like if you have to
Yeah.
take your power back, you have to, and that's not really
Yes.
what we're talking about, personal empowerment. And I want to kind of, break this down for you, for the audience right here, and just ask you, when we talk about empowerment, where does empowerment come from? Does it come from might? Does it come from intellect? Does it come from the inner self? Where does this power that you're speaking about, the soul of power, where does that come from? Let's start there and unpack this.
Yeah. And because what you're alluding to is so true. We have, most of us, I would say all of us, but let's go with most, have an ambivalent relationship to power. Part of us wants it, part of us is afraid of it. And I think what we fear The more that I dive into this theme and this question, I think we fear that if we really stepped into all of our power, into all of who we are, that other people in our lives wouldn't be able to handle that, and that we might end up rejected, alone, and that's no fun.
Yeah.
I think we also fear that we might abuse it, and no wonder. How many abuses of power have we witnessed throughout our
Yeah.
life? And then on top of that, we've been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing, right? Like you were talking about
That's
the book
true.
being a condition of power. And so with quotes like power corrupts and absolute power
Power
corrupts
corrupts.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
And who wants to be corrupted?
That's
But
true.
what they didn't tell us is that Lord Acton, who spoke those words, who wrote those words, was speaking specifically about political power, not the personal power that you and I are talking about. And so when you add to that mix the fact that we've also been conditioned to be afraid of the emotions, we've been conditioned to believe the emotions are weakness, and we hate confrontation, we avoid conflict like the plague. And so when you put all that together, what happens is that we end up giving away our power. We end up settling for less, settling for morsels of pseudo love, for an illusion of security and a semblance of acceptance. And that's not a good strategy for any of us. There's just no need to do that, and it doesn't work. So what this book is about is how do we step into power in a different way that doesn't require that bullying expression, that doesn't require that abuse of power, that doesn't require hierarchical power over, like I need to push somebody down in order for me to feel powerful. There's a different way of doing this.
That to me is one of the most, I was going to say empowering, but it is one of the most empowering things that we can really venture. And you talk about in the book, in the book, Awakening the Soul of Power, you talk about the hero's journey and you talk about the stages of the hero's journey. And I know a lot of people hear the hero's journey in marketing and say, well, here's the marketing sequence for the hero's journey, which is not what I think about when I talk about or know about or feel the hero's journey within myself. And I'm wondering, in this, taking your power back, there's an illusion that the power has been away from you and that you haven't been giving it away. And I was wondering, on this beginning hero's journey, the first thing I would think would be, how am I giving my power away? And I'm wondering if you could name a few ways, because, you talk about, I can't remember what chapter it is in the book, forgive me, but you talk about this thing that really resonated with me about going on a cruise with your mom. And I was like, oh my gosh, you don't even notice that you're giving your power away then, but you're not taking care of yourself, or et cetera. And I'm wondering how, if you could give us some examples of how we do this almost unconsciously, and then maybe how we can put ourselves back in the driver's seat a little bit and be able to see with a different perspective so that we can begin to start the hero's journey across.
Yeah, and you did a beautiful job in the intro of giving some examples of how we give our power away, because our inner power, our spiritual power, our soulful power is inside of us. It's inherent to us. Nobody can give it to us. Nobody can give it away. We are the only ones who give it away. And so it's like you were alluding to in the beginning, is how many times in our lives have we said yes when inside it's really a no, it's really not okay with us. But we override those feelings, our dreams, our preferences, our desires, even our perceptions, in order to settle for that illusion of peace. Like we don't want to rock the boat too much. We're
It's
afraid that
almost our way of saying, I love you, to give up your, it's almost like, okay, I'll give this up so that I can tell you I love you. But in truth, it's really self-sabotaging.
Yes, yes, and to be, more complete about the thought, like in every relationship, as you know, there's compromise. Like we're not going to get our way all the time, and so that's
What?
part of what makes relationship work is like figuring out where we compromise, and part of owning our power is like getting clear about what works for us and what doesn't. what's negotiable and what's not, and developing healthy boundaries so that we both have a sense of empowerment in our relationship, so that we're talking about power with rather than power over, which is the very
Yes.
hierarchical thing that we've been accustomed to think power is.
Yes. We always think it's power over or some sort of domination of someone, when really there is some meeting of the souls, or even the minds, if you will, in order to do that. I love what you just said. I think that there's a part of unpacking what power really is. Like, if you had to describe power, what would it be?
Well, it's interesting that one of the ways that I get into the book that we reclaim our personal power, one of the first steps is realizing that there are different types. So I talk about worldly power, the way that the world thinks about power and relates to power, and or ego power, because that expression of powers all comes from the ego, and it's very egoic. In
Mhm,
contrast with spiritual power or soulful
mhm.
power. So worldly power, we tend to associate power with people who have fame, who are rich, who are wealthy, who are high up in some kind of hierarchy, whether it's the corporate ladder or any kind of organization. But the thing about all those kinds of power is that they're external. They're
Yeah,
outside of us. And because of that, they're fickle. Here
yeah.
today, gone
Gone tomorrow.
tomorrow, as opposed to the inner power, like it's inside each and every one of us. And I'll say that again because I know, like if anybody watching this was like at some point in my life, I had no sense of personal power.
Mhm.
Uh, and so, but I promise you that it's in there, and that it can be evoked, it can be inspired, it can be unleashed and unblocked, because right now we're just blocking it and stuffing it. But that kind of power, that inner power, is inside each and every one of us, and nobody can take it away. We're the only ones, like I was saying, who can give it away. And so whereas worldly power is about, it always has an agenda. It's always
Yeah.
trying to get something for itself, and it's always self-aggrandizing, so blowing itself up
Yep.
to seem
Yep.
bigger than it is. Um, the that other kind of power, the soulful power, is humble, and it doesn't need to prove anything to anybody. It just is. And it's about service. It's about making a difference. So I think of the servant queen, the servant king, the servant leader. They're about service. They're not blowing their own horns
That's right.
for the sake of feeding their own egos. And so I think of a Gandhi or Gandalf, if you're into
Yeah.
the Lord of the Rings, in those simple monastic robes, those sandal feet. From looking at them from the outside, you'd never know how much power they hold
That's so
until
true.
it's necessary, and
That's right.
then get out of the way.
That's right.
Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees when it was at its highest point in,
That's
in,
right.
in terms of global
Without
influence
without
and
a
reach,
step of violence.
without shooting a single gun or landing a single punch. Talk about power.
Mhm. And that's the truth of it right there. When I want to be as transparent as possible with my audience. And I remember while you were talking about worldly power and, what I call conscious power, which is part
Mm,
of your consciousness, your soul self.
great.
I remember back in the day, I was in my early 20s and I was flipping burgers at a McDonald's. And really, I had applied to be a police officer. And because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I got a degree in accounting and I hated it. So I quit because there was a thing about pay and being a woman, and I was not getting enough. So I left. And I spent like 3 months flipping burgers going, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have a degree in accounting and I don't like accounting. What am I going to do? I'll be a police officer. And I remember thinking, and when I grew up, that you became somebody by the titles that you earned.
Mm,
So, oh my God, I'm finally somebody. I have a bachelor's degree. I'm finally somebody. I have a master's degree, or I'm finally somebody. I'm not flipping burgers. I'm now a police officer. And I remember thinking, because you go from flipping burgers where nobody respected you at that age, then suddenly you had all the power in the world. And back then they respected police officers more than they do now. And I remember thinking, I'm nobody, I'm somebody. And then when I left, being a cop, I was like, oh, I'm nobody again.
That's
And the
exactly right.
agenda your mind has with this worldly power means that you're constantly trying to climb a ladder that doesn't exist,
That's
that
so
isn't
true.
even who you are. So there was this quantum leap I had to take where you actually have to let go of the thought that you are what you know, that
Mm,
you are what you think about, that you are all the accolades and adoration that you get, or all the likes on your thing. And you nailed it. The crossover from being self indulgent with me, my degree, my adoration, my this, to serving others. That one bridge from that will take you into your own personal power. And
mm.
isn't that part of the hero's journey, which is what we're talking about
Isn't that
now?
beautiful? The way you just captured that so beautifully. And yes, how many more examples? And we don't have to look very far back in history
Yeah,
of to find examples of people who have all the money in the world, all the power that you could ever
that's
want,
right.
and yet
They still feel
the,
like crap.
they feel like crap. It is so evident that their
Yeah.
self-esteem is like nothing, like the slightest tweet.
Hmm.
It like sends them into a tailspin of defensiveness and attacking people back and coming up with names.
Yeah.
And for them, it's like pitiful. It's really pitiful, like really worthy of pitying.
you
It's
know,
quite tragic.
that I want to say, I think the thing that woke me up the most, this is just for me, this is just me, was the day that I came out, because I could have made a choice to have hidden in the closet forever and ever and ever and never and ever and ever and ever, which would have been so painful for me. But there is a point where if you admit the truth, where you just say, and I remember I was in a car and I had I was young. I had a business, a sports car. I lived a California lifestyle. I had pretty much everything there, and I was still miserable inside. And I remember sitting in the car and saying, okay, what if you could just say it to yourself? You don't have to say it to anyone else, but to thine own self be true. If you could just say that one thing to yourself. And I did. And I said it out loud in kind of a whisper, I'm gay. Okay. But what happened was I felt my shoulders relax. So, what we're so ashamed of about ourselves is maybe that we don't feel good about ourselves. And that in that not feeling good about ourselves, we can't even admit to ourselves, I want more and I want to feel more whole. I want to have more of me. I want to know who I am before I die. I mean, don't you? Don't you want to know who you are before you die and the
Oh my
gift that you brought to the earth? Well, who wouldn't? So when you get to that point, that's when you start the hero's journey he's talking about. And believe it or not, too many people try to start that journey alone. And that's not how you get to the other side by this lone, long journey through the desert. There are some ways which he breaks down in this book, and we're going to be talking about a little bit about breath work right now. I'm going to switch into the conversation because now that you've gotten to the point where you're being okay with your power, which is, you know what, just admit to yourself, I'd like more power. Not I'd like more power so I could serve more people. I'd
God.
like more power so I could have more self-care with myself. If you have
Yes.
that right there, then you are on the hero's journey. And now that we're taking the hero's journey and we've admitted to ourselves, yeah, my self-esteem isn't where I want it to be. I really want to learn to love myself in a better way. And we start that journey. Maybe you go get this book first, and then you go to the address that's scrolling. So if you're driving, relax. The name of the book is Awakening the Soul of Power. And it's how to live heroically and set yourself free. Who doesn't want more of that? I mean, come on. That's a cool thing. But in this, one of the things you talk about is your childhood. And I want to start with this right here because in the beginning, I did I dog ear it? Please say you dog eared it. In the beginning, yes. Actually, it's chapter 3, everybody, in this book. He talks about consciousness around the world and where we're at right now. He's going over what times we live in and where we are in this, craziness. It is evolvement. And he just says something very cool. He says, the single most important thing that needs to happen in our world is the empowerment of women. The world is off balance when it comes to power between the genders. And that imbalance of powers is at the root of most, if not all, of the problems we collectively face. And that rang so true for me. It rang so deeply true because this is why we're afraid of our own power. We don't want to become abusive in any way with it. And we don't want to be manipulated by other people with that.
Hmm.
I want to take a look at, first off, once you decide that you want more power, what does that look like? And what do you mean? Let's dig into this global thinking about power and women and what you see as the inequality in gender. Because, man, I totally agree with you with that.
Yeah, I mean, so much to unpack in what you said.
I know I have a tendency to ask 3 questions at the same time, and people have been like, "Can I answer the first one first?"
Well, I think that was more like 10. I mean, not 10 questions, but 10 brilliant points that we could just follow, roads that we could take. So much of wisdom that you just spoke of. And so the book, yes, it's for everybody. Everybody
Everybody.
struggles with issues around power. And it has a particular message for women because of what you said. Because I do feel, I do believe, and it's a conviction, it's more than a belief, that is the single most important thing that needs to happen in the world. It's not to idealize women, it's not to put women up on a pedestal. Women also abuse power. And it's certainly not to give women more stuff to do and more to do in cleaning up this mess that we have all created.
Yeah.
It's because of what you were saying. It's because of the imbalance between the masculine and the feminine energies that, by the way, course through every one of us. Because
That's right.
in all of creation, there's a balance between the masculine and the feminine energy. It's we humans on this little pebble that we call Earth, hurtling through space, that we have turned the feminine into something weaker, which it isn't. Because if we want to talk courage, strength, power, resilience, let's talk about the power of creation that resides in the female body. And to lighten things up a little bit, I read about an interview with Betty White, who left us about a year ago.
I love her.
And so anyway, it was one of those group interviews with multiple celebrities, and somebody said something about having balls. And I hope this doesn't offend anybody watching this. But she goes in her unique, inimitable way. Well, wait a minute. Where do we get this connection about balls and courage? Because you thump those little things and the guy bends over, collapses in pain. If you want to talk power and courage and strength, let's talk vaginas. Those things take a pounding.
That's right.
But seriously, I do believe that when women are in 50% of power in this world, that we're going to have a very different relationship to war and poverty and hunger and social justice and education and how we treat the environment, to all of it. And to me, it's including homophobia, by the way. A whole other conversation, but I do believe that misogyny and homophobia, two sides of the same coin, and the more I think about it, I think misogyny is really the deeper one. And so to me, it's about thinking about strategically, like how do we dig ourselves out of this hole that we have collectively dug ourselves into. To me, it's like, all right, well, the main thing that happens that will impact everything else is the empowerment of women.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I just recently got a chance to listen to Elena Cardone, which is Grant Cardone's wife, talk about something that really landed with me. And she said, Grant gives 100% and I give 100%. It doesn't mean our relationship is 50-50. It means it's 200%. It's my 100% and his 100%, and that's 200% in. And I realize, yes, I mean, for me, that is the power of collaborating with your spouse and that yin or yang. And one of the other thing is I try to stay away from feminine and masculine. I say yin and yang for me because they're energies. The thing I like about being gay, if you will, the thing that I really embrace about that is that for me, both are there. And it's that relationship inside me that is reflected in the Elena Cardone statement. It's 100% of my yin, it's 100% of my yang, and that makes 200% of me. And that becomes power. It's the power to say no. And unfortunately, in this world that we have where violence is the way, we think part of power is being able to protect yourself from or defend yourself. But the truth is, I have listened and been safer with my internal power saying, leave this party now, go away from this man here, go over to that there, talk to this person here. That power, that internal power, always keeps me safe, always keeps me in the present moment, always keeps me absolutely in the best opportunities, and it protects me. And it does so just consistently doing so. And I think the expression of how we're learning about power, and I want to go into breath work right now because I just did my very first breath work exercise with someone who is teaching it. And I was like wowed by it, just completely wowed by it. But some people who feel disempowered right now, personal power seems so far away. Maybe they're in an abusive relationship and they feel trapped or stuck. Maybe they're, at their wits' end, or maybe they're feeling suicidal or so unworthy or unimportant that they have no sense of self or power. And I believe those, because you do a lot of great work in this book with the ego. I've read so much of this book. I'm not finished with it yet, but I've read so much of it, and there's so many cool things about it. I'm not sure where to go with the conversation because I want it all in there. I was like, let's just go all in there. But it's such an empowering piece of work. And I think people with strong egos, underneath their strong egos, have issues with their own personal power, because personal power is very humble, super kind. It is humorous, and it is serving. It's very servant oriented because it's an aspect of our soul. It's not an aspect of our thinking or who we
Correct.
think we are. And that's the difference. We try to reach our inner power by thinking about it, and that doesn't work. So, what I'm hoping is that you will unpack how you reach your inner power using, I think, breath work. Is that true? Hey, if
Well,
you guys are listening and you have a question for him, fire away. I'm right here. I'll ask him. Go ahead.
yeah, it's such a great question because, like I said before, I know self-doubt. In fact, Vickie, I know self-hatred. My
Yeah,
entire adolescence, I
me
struggled
too.
with issues of self-acceptance and self-love. Well, there was a part of me, a big part of me, that wanted to serve the sacred as I understood it at that point in my life. I grew up in a very Catholic environment
Yeah,
and was told by that very religion in which I was raised that there was no room for me, that I was
right.
anathema in the eyes of God, that I was going to burn in hell for eternity because of who I
Yeah,
was. So flash forward to today, as I struggle with integrating all these parts of me, my spirituality, my sexuality, as a gay man. Um, and so as I've integrated all these parts of me today, like no matter the details, the circumstances of my life, whether a relationship works out or it doesn't, whether a project succeeds or it fails, in
mhm,
quotes, never, ever, ever do I question my sense of self. And so I
yeah,
know that if that can happen in me, it can happen in anybody, that we can
yeah.
get to that level of self acceptance and self love that is unshakable.
That's
And,
right.
and that's what I want everybody to have, because I know that it's possible to have it and that it has nothing to do with externals, as you were talking about, all the superficial ways in which we validate ourselves. That that are not very effective because of their very external nature. Like we were saying before, the degrees, the bank account, none of that matters in the end. That what we're talking about can only come from within, and is that ability to look at ourselves in the mirror and be able to hold the gaze in a self-loving way, and to sleep peacefully at night, to have that inner peace that only comes from that. And so for me, it was a combination of two things. It was a combination of self-acceptance, and that was a journey which began with self-awareness, because we can't do anything about what we can't see. And so much of the stuff that we're talking about, all these obstacles to love within ourselves, all the obstacles to self-acceptance, are mostly subconscious. So we're not even aware of why we do the things we do and why we feel the ways that we feel. So that's the first step, which is asking ourselves the hard questions, the existential questions. Who am I? What am I doing here? What am I here for? What is my purpose? And what are my triggers? What are my patterns? Why do certain people seem to get my goat and others don't? Or why do certain behaviors or certain acts get my goat when my friend doesn't seem bothered by them? And nobody can answer those questions for us except ourselves. So for me, it was part of that journey, which is nothing less than heroic. That's part of what I mean about a heroic journey. It's like it takes work. It takes courage to dive deep within and face ourselves, face our fears, face our self-doubt, face our inner demons, which we all have. And it's infinitely worthwhile journey, because the reward for that willingness and that courage is freedom. And that sense of personal empowerment and being who we are wherever we are, and no longer needing any external validation. Like that is priceless.
Amen. You're melting my heart, really. I'm like, wow, this is, dude, you are just melting my heart, Christian. I'm telling you, it's beautiful to be speaking about this in the way that you're speaking about it. Because I kind of know the road. I know the road a little bit, how you have traversed it, and I have too. And I think as the years go by and I look back, I think the thing that saved me most is my lack of acceptance in the world for being gay. If the world accepted you, you could become lost more easily. When the world doesn't accept you, you have to look for a different venue. You have to. There's like the deciding factor, dissolve or die. And I mean, dissolve your ego or die. Either way, it's kind of die. But, there's a point where you have to look for the true self in order for you to even become who you are. And so many people can get lost because of acceptance in the world, that they never have to touch their inner self at all. And if it all just fades or blows up, that's when, that big crash or that big fall, if they have it. And if not, what you just said is the myth, the only thing you can take with you, the only piece of you that is going with you at any point in time, is the part of you that you develop inside. It's like all your personality is going to die. Your hair color is going to be gone. Your gender is going to be gone. And if you look at it, if you die, are you a boy or a girl? So why are you so identified with the role that you play as a boy or a girl? And I think the inner part of you is so ignored, and it is the most powerful part of you. People keep saying that you have potential. That's bullshit. You are potential, and that's vastly different. And how you tap in and get your potential out, because that is who you actually are, is a ball of potential that can create and serve and do and solve problems and live and have experiences. And I want to talk about breath work, because I have done a lot of spiritual work and practices and still do. And I wasn't very familiar with breath work. And I just did it for the very first time, one little exercise. And I was like, wow. So let's talk about, it doesn't matter whether you're where you are in your life right now. If you tap into the power of you, It's exactly what Wayne Dyer says. You got to change the way you look at things, and the things you look at will change. So your whole life can transform differently with this ability to become aware of you and use the tools that are going to help you tap into your own inner power. And you can sit in the car and say it to yourself without anybody looking. You can just lean in, and nobody has to know. You can just say, I am powerful. And just sit with that feeling of coming out and saying, you're right, I am powerful. Even though my mind doesn't think I am. You aren't your mind. You're the thing that is beside the mind, right here, kind of locked up in here. It's like you're that spiritual being. The mind is kind of a tool that thinks it's in charge when it's not. So the first person you have to take the power back from is the guy who usurped the power in the first place, which is your thinking mind. So
Yes.
this is how I think we're going to be going into breath work. And I wherever you want to start with breath work and anything else, please do me a favor and just jump in and go for it.
So, thank you. You know, I love how you weave in all these amazing different thoughts and philosophies, because it's true. And I do a lot of different retreats. Have been doing retreats for 30 something years, up until 3 years ago. I'm just now scheduling live events again, this month in particular. And so there's two things that I always include, no matter what the theme is, whether it's relationships or empowerment or living heroically or whatever the theme is, life purpose. One is the ego, which is what you've been talking about. And we don't have time to dive into that. It's a huge conversation and critically important. But here's a quick image to help us really understand what we're talking about when we talk about ego. And so if you imagine a baseball in the center of a stadium, that's what the ego is. Who we are is actually the stadium. And we've allowed this tiny, tiny, tiny part of who we are to think that it is all of who we are, and to make really important, consequential choices about our lives, about our relationships, about what we do with them from its very small, tiny, and always limited and fear-based perspective, right? So that's the source of understanding that power lives beyond that little baseball, that power lives in the reality of the stadium, our authentic, real nature. The other thing that you've asked me to speak about is breath work. And let me start by talking about it this way. My dad was a psychiatrist. My degree was in psychology. I was on track to get a PhD in psychology. When I discovered breath work, after my very first session, I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD because it works so fast and heals so profoundly at so many levels. 33 years later, I have yet to come across anything that heals past trauma as quickly and as effectively. And beyond that, it heals not only emotionally and psychologically, but mentally and spiritually and even physically. And yes, I know that sounds too good to be true. To my more scientific, skeptical mind, it's even 33 years into it, that sounds too good to be true to me too, but it works. I can't argue with the results. And there's the umbrella of breathwork. It's broad. There's a lot of different modalities and practices. Anybody who's gone to yoga classes has done breathwork. It's called pranayama. There's different breathing techniques for relaxation, for dealing with stress. There are other ones that are more focusing and energizing, that help us bring focus and intention together. The type that I'm doing, you do it for a longer period of time. You breathe in this specific circular connected way for about an hour and a half, and amazing things happen. I can't tell you enough about it. And I just want to say one more thing about healing past trauma is that I've worked with and have worked with countless people who have really struggled with very intense trauma. We're talking about sexual abuse, incest, rape, people who've experienced violent stuff happen to them, and it gets healed. And with all due respect to the psychotherapy process, in the right hands, with the right goals, with goals in mind, it can be incredibly supportive. And we all know that you can sit on somebody's couch for 5, 10,
Yep.
20, 30 years,
Yep.
rehashing the same old crap,
Yep.
and nothing really happens. And why is that? That's because the trauma no longer lives in the mind. So no amount of talking about it is really going to get to it. The trauma has now been somaticized and lives in the cells and the tissues of the body. That's the beauty of breathwork. It bypasses the mind and it goes to the source of trauma, which now lives in the body, and it clears it
Beautiful.
permanently. And with amazing results. Like, I'm still humbled that I get to facilitate that experience for people.
This is such an amazing conversation because I think there's a lot of awakening, I'll call it, happening on the planet right now. I just think there's a lot because the mind doesn't know what to do. It's lost the what to do. You don't know who to believe. And on one hand, it had to happen that way. So, because the mind is always trying to solve problems, protect you, it's trying to do its thing. And it's not bad or wrong, it's just trying to do its thing. And it just wants control all the time. And we've gotten to the point where we don't trust our politicians, our banks, our pharmacies, our doctors, we're in this big distrust bubble.
Our
So the
religious
mind,
leaders.
everything. We have this. It is on the Eldman's trust barometer. It's the lowest it's ever been in history. That we just don't trust anything. Well, we had to get to that point because we keep going outside of ourselves,
Yeah.
seeking the advice of instead of and now the advice of you've been lied to, you've been manipulated, there's so much of this going on. Your mind has finally stopped and can possibly say, I don't know what to do. And the second that the mind says, I don't know what to do, finally, the soul can go, wait, dude, I've had this for years. If you just listen to me before, then, but just hear me out. And it can suddenly have a way out. It suddenly has a voice when there's nothing else to do. And you're like, and I remember that moment happening to me, the amount of awareness and mindfulness. Now, I think I was like 18 years old and I was at a little taco shop in California and a guy came in to rob us and he held the gun directly in my stomach. And in that moment, I looked down and it was a revolver. I could see the bullets in the gun. But in that moment, a wakefulness happened. I mean, awake, like awake, so awake that I long to get back there 100% of the time. So awake. And I remember in that wakefulness, it's going to sound crazy to the rest of the world. Don't judge, just listen. In that wakefulness moment, what ended up happening was I could hear another voice that wasn't mine. And it was telling me from moment to moment to moment what to do. And literally, in that voice saved me and saved the other person that was in there from being shot. I mean, the guy was really not himself. But what ended up happening was there was a point where I was so calm because of this inner voice talking to me that it calmed him down and it calmed the whole situation. Everything de-escalated. And from that point on, I knew that I had an inner voice that always knew what to do. And I think the issue right now in the world is that we aren't listening to our inner voice. And whether I use meditation or contemplation or breath work or whatever it is, because sometimes I do everything. One of those things about coming to our inner is the only way out. In the words of Alanis Morissette, the only way out is through. It's through you. So I want to get to the point where we're talking about this inner space. And, maybe you have an inner voice, but if you haven't met it, if you haven't engaged with it, if you don't believe it's there, if you don't think that there is, and I'm not talking about, I have guides and angels That's great. That's fine. Having guides and angels are great. I'm talking about the inner master. I'm talking about the inner master that exists in you in such a way that is specifically just for you to help you move. Like if you're listening to this conversation right now, it's no accident. And right here in this moment, that breath work that he's talking about, where you do it about an hour a day, you say?
No, and I wouldn't do it an hour a day. But you do
Good.
it an hour session, an hour and a half.
An hour and a half session. What's a beginning? Let's do like somebody who's listening right now. Where would you start them? What kind of exercise maybe we could do? And not for an hour and a half, obviously,
No.
but let's start like something for the first thing. And then I want to talk about your retreats and things that you do to help people meet their inner power.
Well, I want to highlight what the story you just said, because it was so moving to me. And you speak about it so beautifully. Like I was there with you when you were retelling that story. And what happened is that situation popped you out of the baseball and into the realm of the stadium.
That's right.
That yes is inside each and every one of us. It's there. And so we all have access to that. All we got to do is learn how to quiet that crazy monkey mind, which is what the Buddhists refer to as the ego, is that part of us that has constantly chattering, that from the minute we get up in the morning before our feet even hits the floor, it's got something to say about everyone and everything, and it's exhausting every single moment of the day until we finally, if we're able to, fall asleep at the end of the day. Because sometimes, and I know you and I are not the only ones that this has happened to, it keeps us up all night with that constant exhausting craziness inside of our heads.
I think Arianna Huffington calls it the obnoxious roommate.
Yeah, it is. I think it's obnoxious for sure, but it's worse. It's worse than that. It's insanity inside of our heads until, like you were talking about, we learn how to quiet it. And once we learn how to quiet, whether it's meditation or breathwork or contemplation in nature or prayer or journaling, these are all practices that we all have access to. So we find one that resonates with us and we quiet the mind. Right? Maybe it's sitting at the beach watching a beautiful sunset, so that the mind quiets down, and then we have access to those moments of insight, of intuition, of connection that we all have access to, and that's the experience that you had.
Yeah,
but I think
felt
I
incredible
didn't answer your
love.
question, but I forget what the question was.
That's okay. I felt this incredible love happen because, I was innocent at 18. I wasn't, I wasn't abused by the world yet. I was, I'm 18. You feel, just empowered. And well, I did. And, you don't feel anything can hurt you. And you're certainly not going to die because you're 18. You don't die till you're 100. But the thing that happened in that moment when I went from the little ball and I blew up into the stadium, well, the little ball is the mind that didn't know what to do. So the part of me that did know what to do showed up. That was me, who I actually am, which is soul. It isn't like, it's like Wayne Dyer. You are a spirit, a soul having a human experience. When I left that human consciousness and I exploded into the stadium, the amount of love I felt, I'd never felt before in my life, nor did I think it was possible. And I know that a lot of people try to access this part of them by going on spiritual journeys. And a lot of them go to Peru or some other countries where they take the medicine and they see the stadium, but then they have to come back into the ball. And that's the painful part. And here, the reason I do it this way is because when I'm in the stadium, I want to stay in the stadium. I don't want to use the ball unless I'm crossing the street and looking to see if the traffic is okay so I can cross the street safely. But then I want to go back and be in that ball and be that ball all the time. And you have to remind yourself over and over again that you are that. That's what you actually are. Because if you don't, your mind will usurp you right away. And I like the thing you said about journaling, because in journaling, your mind has an activity that it's doing, but somehow it shares also, which is why I write books. I get to share my soul as well. And that's,
Mm.
moving past the ego, how you can essentially meet yourself. Is there a beginner breath technique that we can do on the show, maybe, that you would be willing to show us, and then tell us a little bit about your, here I am with all three questions all at once. Then tell us something about your retreats that you're planning this year and how people can become involved with you. And the first thing I'm going to tell you do is go buy this book. Go buy this book. It is in the link. If you're driving or you're listening, relax. It's The Awakening the Soul of Power. It's by Christian De La Huerta. And it is superb. It is an excellent read. And I know because I'm enjoying it so much. And I feel very fortunate that I'm having this conversation with a fresh read. It's just fun.
Thank you so much, Vickie. I mean, what a beautiful, incredible endorsement. Thank you. Yeah, in terms of the practice, it's simple breath, right? It's about becoming present to the breath. Like if we think about it, the breath is our most loyal companion on this journey of embodiment, on this journey of being alive. And if we think about it further, in every religion and spiritual tradition, or let's say in almost every one of them, the same word, one word, can mean breath or spirit, depending on the context, depending on what we're talking about. So any practice that we can do to slow down the breathing, slow down the thinking, and start finding those places, those places of emptiness between the thoughts. Anything that we can do to deepen our connection with the breath is going to make all the difference. And rather than, like anybody watching this and say, oh, I'm going to start meditating, an hour a day for 7 days a week. It's like, no, start small, right? Let's not set ourselves up for failure. Let's start small, and then each one of those little wins becomes self-rewarding. So I would rather that you do this 5 minutes, 4 times a week, 5 times a week. And so that you're going on your walk, you can do this driving, where you can do it as you're falling asleep, where you just become present, watch what's going on inside you, watch what's going on with your body, sensations, your thoughts, your emotions. So it's developing that witness consciousness, because that witness consciousness is the stadium nature, is the observer self, rather than getting stuck in all of the experiences that we're having and all the thoughts that we're having. So the breath is a great key to that, is a great way to enter that. And so just breathe consciously, right? Like watch yourself breathing. And yeah, it can be boring, but it's life-changing, right? And so count your breath, right? Just count like breathe start with 3 seconds, 4 seconds, however you can do it. And then with practice, you'll increase that to 6, 7, 8 more, longer seconds. So you count your inhale, and then you count your exhale. And that gives the mind something to focus on. That's meditation. That alone is meditation. It's just giving the mind something to focus on, whether it's a mantra or it's counting your breath or staring at a candle. That's the intention, is by focusing, giving the mind something to focus on, we start learning how to break free from it and how to develop that witness consciousness. In terms of the retreats that you asked me to talk about, yeah, I'm doing the first one at the end of March. It's in Northern California. This one, it's
Cool.
over the course of the weekend. We start Thursday night. We end on Sunday afternoon, and we'll do this breathwork session, the longer one that we're talking about, 4 times. And there's a cumulative effect of doing that. They kind of build on each other. It's really, really powerful. And the theme for this one is conscious relationships. Like, how do we do our relationships consciously? Like, and so how do we approach them in a conscious, intentional way? Because if we're still approaching, I'm hoping that nobody here is still doing this, but if we're approaching our relationships as, you are going to make me happy, hang it up. Forget it. There isn't anyone out there who can make us happy, and it's not even their job to. How unfair to put that responsibility on anyone else. You are going to make me happy. Yikes. So forget it. doomed to fail. It's not going to happen with anyone out there. Only we can make ourselves happy. And I'm hoping and trusting that everyone watching this knows that already. And so what does it mean to do relationships consciously? If you are in a relationship already and you've got those basic human needs for companionship, for love, for intimacy, for sex, for family, for sharing a life with, great, right? Then what? How can we use that container, that form of the relationship, to speed up, to fast track our own process of healing and evolution and transformation, which is ultimately what we're all here for? And if you're not in a relationship and would like to be, how do we identify the subconscious patterns that have us sabotaging our relationships before they get go, by falling for the wrong people, by people who are not available, people who are not a match, people who live on the other side of the world, or they're already with somebody else, or they're just not there, sadly, right? So what are we doing? Like, why do we do that? Because if we have, the first step is getting honest. Like if we focus on the other partner in the relationship and what they did and what they failed to do, forget it. We're not going to learn from it. There is one constant in every one of those relationships, in every one of those arguments, and it's right here. Right? And once we get that, then we can do something about it. Then we can break those patterns. Then we can start bringing light into those subconscious patterns that have us sabotaging our relationships before we even get started with them.
I love what you're saying so much. Listen, if you're driving or whatever you're doing at work, if you're just listening, and his retreat, Conscious Relationships, we have the address right there, the web address. It's soulfulpower.com, offerings and retreats, and you'll see Conscious Relationships, Soulful Relationships. And you can go ahead and go to that website and become part of the Soulful tribe that he does these relationship seminars and things like that, all on that event. It's in the show notes. It's on screen right now. We've left it up there for a while. Robin popped it up for us. Thank you, Robin, for doing that.
Thank you, Robin.
But the other thing I want you to see is that inside you can grab his book. And I'm not kidding. I read a lot of spiritual books. This one is super easy to read. It's fun to read, and you will get lost in reading it. You know, it's one of those books that you pick up and you can't put down, and you just keep going and going and going because it was so full of wonderful things. And I don't want to tell you all about it because I don't want to ruin it all for you, but I'm just saying, go get that book right now. Just go get that Awakening of the Soul. You just go on to Amazon. You can get it on his site. He's got his book site, which is the soulfulpower.com, Awakening the Power book. You can just click on there and find the book and get it there, or at Amazon. And I have to say that this has been such, I can't even tell you, it is such a lovely conversation today. It speaks to my soul so much, obviously. But I need to tell you this. You're doing the real work. You're doing the work in the world that is servant work in such a way that I feel supported by seeing another person in the world who is doing this kind of work and who sees a lot of the same things I see, and probably more in some areas. I don't know. But to me, it's so sacred to be here at this time on the planet. It's such a sacred, it's the only time I think really that we can take such a huge quantum leap in consciousness. And I mean like quantum leaps like we've never been able to do in the past. We are here now. And although it looks confusing, there are people like you who are on the side going, nope, this is your lane over here, go this way. And, you know, the plane's leaving this way, go that way. And I want to say that I appreciate everything that you had to do or go through to get where you are right now. And I want to say thank you for you. You are certainly a great gift. Thank you for you.
Vickie, wow, I am so profoundly moved. by your words and by that acknowledgement, really at a deep level, soul level.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel like I have a new spiritual sister, and I'm so
So do I.
grateful,
It's
so
like my
grateful.
brother.
Yeah, and it's so nurturing. This conversation has been amazing and nurturing, and I've loved the back and forth. And I mean, the way you describe the book as fun to read, that's one of my favorite endorsements.
Well, it's definitely up my alley of what I love to read. So it was wicked fun for me. And you do a lot of personal stories in there, and it was really cool.
Yeah, and I try to make it that way. I know how busy we all are. So I try to do it with short chapters, bring in a lot of cultural and references from movies and songs and books, because I know how busy how everybody is. And this is, heroic work. To look in within and face ourselves is heroic work. It's a lot easier to kind of coast through life and numb ourselves out in all the creative ways that we do, and all the ways that the things that we do to run away from our feelings and our beliefs, whether it's self-medicating with drugs or substances or food or social media or shopping or TV or sex or whatever it is. And I get it, I get that. But it doesn't work. We can't run away from that stuff. It's only going to get worse and fester under the surface. So yes, it's heroic. Yes, it takes courage. And yes, it is infinitely worthwhile to do that. And thank you again for having me on the show. Thank you for having the show, because I know that in your willingness to do so, and I know that it takes work and it takes presence and it takes commitment and it takes dedication to do this on a regular basis. Because of your willingness to do that, many, many lives are being touched and impacted. So thank you, sister.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. We bring the best experts from around the world every Wednesday on the Coffee Break Show. And next Wednesday, we're going to have an equally fabulous guest. I will see you next Wednesday. Thank you for being on the show. Talk to you later.